What's up, guys? Mr. Shaver back with you. Number of the stars. We're rolling, man. We are rolling right now, and some crazy stuff going down. We are on chapter 10 today. So the last thing that we read together, when we flip back like we always do, chapter 9 was called "Why Are You Lying?" And this is basically where Anne Marie called out Uncle Heinrich, saying that he's lying, and so is Mama about uh, Great Aunt Bertie. So they're calling. She calls him out, and he basically tells her, "You're right. We lied to you. There is no Great Aunt Bertie," which to me blew my mind, right? Because we did not know that. A lot of you thought that, but we didn't know for sure that she wasn't a real person. Um, so the big part, though, on page 76, he talks about it's much easier to be brave if you don't know everything. So that was the example, or the question from our last chapter was, what, do you believe that? I mean, it's easier to be brave if you don't know everything, right? So I used an example in class. I yelled at a kid and said, "Hey, go pick up those copies from the gym for me, or from the copy machine for me." And he got up, walked out of the room, but I stopped him and I told him, "You went, right? Was that brave to go get copies from the room?" And he's like, "No, that's not brave. I just went to go get copies for you." So in my head, I then said to him, "Well, what if I told you there was a giant lion waiting for you in the hallway? You probably would have thought differently about going in the hallway and picking up those copies, right?" So if you don't know what the fear is or what to be afraid of, it's a lot easier to be brave. So just in this case, that's why they lied to Anne Marie, is so that she didn't know everything, so it'd be easier for her to be brave. Because maybe if she knew that that the soldiers were looking for Jewish people, who knows what would have said to that soldier, or if she knew any of this stuff that they're hiding from each other, is helping them be brave and helping them not to know it all. So he admitted it. He doesn't know everything. Mama doesn't know everything, but they do it because they love each other and they want to be safe. So with all this craziness going on, and of course the biggest thing in this chapter, Ellen's back with her mom and dad. They're there. They came back. Um, her dad was holding her, and her mom walked in with her. So Peter, we knew they were with Peter, and Peter showed up, and they had him with them. Other part is there's a bunch of strangers there, right, gathering for the funeral or the mourning, but she still doesn't know who those people are and why they're there. And they said, is the weather, or is today the day for fishing? And they said yes. So Heinrich's staying in the boat all night, and yeah, let's see where we're at. All right, let us open the casket. "You're all here now," Uncle Heinrich said, looking around the living room. "I must go." Anne Marie stood in the wide doorway looking in from the hall. The baby slept now, and its mother looked tired. Her husband sat beside her, his arm across her shoulders. The old man's head was still bent. Peter sat alone, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. It was clear that he was deep in thought. On the sofa, Ellen sat between her parents, one hand clasped tightly in her mother's. She looked up at Anne Marie but didn't smile. Anne Marie felt a surge of sadness. The bond of their friendship had not broken, but it was as if Ellen had moved now into a different world, the world of her own family and whatever lay ahead of them. The elderly bearded man looked up suddenly as Uncle Heinrich prepared to go. "God keep you safe," he said in a firm but quiet voice. Heinrich nodded. "God keep us all safe," he replied. Then he turned and left the room. A moment later, Anne Marie heard him leave the house. Mamma brought the teapot from the kitchen and trays of cups. Anne Marie helped her pass the cups around. No one spoke. "Anne Marie," Mamma whispered to her in the hall, "you may go to bed if you want. It's very late." Anne Marie shook her head, but she was tired. She could see that Ellen was too. Her friend's head was leaning on her mother's shoulder, and her eyes closed now and then. Finally, Anne Marie went to the empty rocking chair in the corner of the living room and curled there with her head against its soft, padded back. She dozed. She was startled from her half sleep by a sudden sweep of headlights through the sheer curtains and across the room as a car pulled up outside. The car door slammed. Everyone in the room tensed, but no one spoke. She heard, as if in a recurring nightmare, the pounding on the door, and then heavy, frightening, familiar staccato of boots on the kitchen floor. The woman with the baby gasped and began suddenly to weep. You know, it's soldiers, right? The male, accented voice from the kitchen was loud. "We have observed," he said, "that an unusual number of people have gathered at this house tonight. What is the explanation?" "There's been a death," Mama's voice replied calmly. "It's always our custom to gather and pay our respects when a family member dies. I am sure you are familiar with our customs." One of the officers pushed Mama ahead of him from the kitchen and entered the living room. There were others behind him. They filled the wide doorway. As always, their boots gleamed, their guns, their helmets. All of them gleamed in the candlelight. Anne-Marie watched as the man's eyes moved around the room. He looked for a long time at the casket. Then he moved his gaze, focusing on each person in turn. When his eyes reached her, she looked back at him steadily. "Who died?" he asked harshly. No one answered. They watched Anne-Marie and realized that the officer was directing the question at her. Now she knew for certain what Uncle Heinrich had been meant when he had talked to her in the barn. To be brave came more easily if you knew nothing. She swallowed. "My great Aunt Bertie?" She lied in a firm voice. The officer moved forward suddenly across the room to the casket. He placed one gloved hand on its lid. "Poor Aunt Great Bertie," he said in a condescending voice. "I do know your customs," he said, turning his gaze towards Mama, who stood in the doorway. "And I know it's custom to pay one's respect by looking your loved ones in the face. It seems odd to me that you've closed this coffin up so tightly." His hand was in a fist, and he rubbed it across the edge of the polished lid. "Why is it not open?" he demanded. "Let us open it and take one last look at Great Aunt Bertie." Anne-Marie saw Peter, across the room, stiffen in his chair, lift his chin, and reach slowly with one hand toward his side. Mama walked quickly across the room, directly to the casket, directly to the officer. "You're right," she said. "The doctor said it should be closed because Aunt Bertie died of typhus. And he said that there was a chance the germs would still be in there, would still be dangerous. But what does he know? Only a country doctor. And an old man at that. Surely typhus germs won't linger in a dead person. And dear Aunt Bertie, I've been longing to see her face, to kiss her goodbye. Of course we will open the casket. I am glad you suggested." With a swift motion, the Nazi officer slapped Mama across the face. She staggered backward, and a white mark on her cheek darkened. "You foolish woman," he spat, "to think that we have any interest in seeing the body of your deceased aunt. Open it after we leave," he said. With one gloved thumb, he pressed the candle flame into darkness. The hot wax spattered to the table. "Put all these candles out," he said, "or pull the curtains." Then he strode to the doorway and left the room. Motionless, silent, one hand to her cheek, Mama listened. They all listened, as the uniformed men left the house. In a moment they heard the car doors, the sound of its engine, and finally they heard it drive away. "Mama!" Anne-Marie cried. Her mother shook her head quickly and glanced at the open window covering only by a sheer curtain. Anne-Marie understood. There might still be soldiers outside, watching, listening. Peter stood and drew the dark curtains across the windows. He relit the extinguished candle, and then he reached for an old Bible that had always been there, on the mantel. He opened it and quickly said, "I'll read a psalm." His eyes turned to the page he had opened at random, and he began to read in a strong voice. "Oh, praise the Lord! How good it is to sing psalms to our God! How pleasant to praise Him! The Lord is rebuilding Jerusalem. He gathers in scattered sons of Israel. It is He who heals the broken in spirit and binds up their wounds. He who numbers the stars one by one. Number the stars. Mama sat down and listened. Gradually, they each began to relax. Anne Marie could see the old man across the room moving his lips as Peter read. He knew the ancient psalm by heart. Anne Marie didn't. The words were familiar to her, and she tried to listen, tried to understand, tried to forget the war and the Nazis, tried not to cry, tried to be brave. The night breeze moved the dark curtains at the open windows. Outside, she knew, the sky was speckled with stars. How could anyone number them one by one, as the psalm said? There were too many. The sky was too big. Ellen had said that her mother was frightened of the ocean, that it was too cold and too big. The sky was too, thought Anne Marie. The whole world was. Too cold, too big, and too cruel. Peter read on in a firm voice, though it was clear he was tired. The long minutes passed. They seemed hours. Finally, still reading, he moved quietly to the window. He closed the Bible and listened to the quiet night, and then he looked around the room. Now, he said, it is time. First, he closed the windows, and then he went to the casket and opened the lid. And that's it. We're stopping there. That's the end of chapter 10. What's in the casket? I want to know. We'll find out. Crazy situation, though. Cannot believe the soldiers came. Well, I can believe the soldiers came because they always come, right? Whew, crazy. I'll see you next time, guys.